Good evening. Welcome out tonight to this online workshop for tax sale investors. I'm Shade Foray with Tax Sale Support, and I'm happy to have you join us. I'm actually sitting next to my business partner, Stephen Swenson.
Yeah, absolutely. We try to do these webinars, a free workshop each month for new investors, and for the month of December, we usually hold these on Saturday, but this month we're going to be out of town and have obligations, so we decided to hold one on a Thursday night.
Yeah, so we are happy to have you join us here. This is not a rerun. These are always live. I know there are some companies out there that do reruns, but we always create new content. We always film them live as well. So this is certainly a live event. So you're welcome to ask questions actually throughout it, and we will try to answer those as we get time throughout the training.
Yeah, absolutely. And tonight we're actually going to be talking a little bit about a different subject in over-the-counter investing.
Yeah, which is really what we're talking about are buying methods here, and a specific buying method, and some of the advantages that are associated with it. But before we get into that, we know that many of you may not be members of our website or membership program. You may be fairly new to us.
Yeah, exactly. And so we just quickly like to go over a little bit about what we've done and what we've been involved with. We attended our first tax sale in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's when we first got involved with it and started learning about tax liens and deeds.
Yeah, in fact, I think Steve was initially the one that was first introduced to tax sales, although we're cousins and we've grown up with each other. So basically, shortly after he learned about it, he talked with me about the idea. You were working as a real estate agent at the time when your I think it was your broker told you about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my broker invited me to the sale, kind of explained the process to me as we rode over a little bit, and attended the sale. And then, of course, as soon as I got done, like Shade said, we've been cousins and been hanging around our whole life. And so I got him involved, and we started to try to learn everything we could about it. And so for the next 5 or 6 years, we attended auctions. We worked with, in fact, we even sought out different training companies and seminar companies, trying to work with them or buying their programs, trying to learn everything we could about it. Really, we ended up getting a little bit discouraged because a lot of the information when we first got started was really outdated and had to do with buying tax liens and deeds really before the internet.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the real advantages that we had with the time frame in which we were starting to look. It was a frustrating time frame because there wasn't a lot of information out there about how it worked, but it was also if you were going to get started with it, starting right with the internet is a good time because the internet really fundamentally transformed tax sale investing.
Yeah, exactly. So we started putting together information, and over the period of those years, eventually we ended up creating our home study program. And once we did that, we started working with a lot of different seminar companies, and we were kind of the ghost writers and behind the scenes guys, and we'd private label our programs, our tax sale program, to a lot of the real estate seminar companies that were taking place in.
Yeah, which that worked out great for a while as a way to be able to teach a lot of people. But as a lot of you probably know, if you are here, you've probably been to different seminars. The thing about working with these seminar companies was that they were sales organizations, and it didn't give us a lot of control over things. And there are also other issues there with their trainings and things not working. In the end, ultimately, we wanted to get away from that and be able to provide, because we knew we could provide the training more affordably to people directly, and there was no need for it to be that expensive. We knew we could do it affordably and provide a good product.
Yeah, exactly. So after about a decade or so of working with the seminar companies, we ended up deciding to take the program that the seminar companies were selling for $2,000 to $3,000 in book form with the CDs and the books in a fancy kit, and just put it online. make it PDF download, and essentially do it for a low monthly fee.
Yeah, which that's what our membership program is. You can sign up for $39 a month, or even less than that, $29 a month if you want to pay for a whole year. And you can, join our weekly webinars and be able to access all of the lists, which, a lot of it's about the list service, but it's also about the training content that's there as well, and links to all of the lists and the different auctions and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, really, as we have launched and started to provide this directly to the public, we have absolutely loved being able to present and bring this directly to people, and it's been incredibly successful, and it's worked out really well. Before we dig into tax liens here and tax deeds, we just wanted to mention here at the beginning that we actually have our 3-day event workshop coming up here in Orlando. It's like next week. It's like a week away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we don't have very many tickets left. It's almost sold out. We have 1 or 2 tickets left. So if you're interested in attending, definitely let us know. It was a pretty incredible event. We held our first one of this type last month in Las Vegas, and just had tremendous success. We got a chance to meet so many of the investors that we work with. Really, the 3-day is a more of advanced training because it's attended mostly by our coaching members and some of our members, and so these are students that are usually a more advanced training. So it is a pretty advanced training when it comes to tax sale investing.
Yeah. By the way, a good question John has is, can I subscribe just to the lists? That's actually something that we've talked about here in the past. I think at some point we will have it set up so that it can be separate.
Yeah.
It's not set up like that right now. We apologize for that. It'll take us a little bit longer to get that all set up. And how good or accurate are the lists, and are they all over the USA? First off, yes, they are all over the USA. Trying to determine exactly when places are having their tax sales, and being able to access all of that and know how often it happens. And it's taken a long time, I guess, to kind of figure out some of this stuff over time. When it comes to the way that we provide the lists, we provide them in the exact same format and way that the county provides them to us, so they're accurate lists. Although anytime if you're going to start working on a list in any serious way, you're going to want to check that, even on a day-to-day basis, we upload the newest list if we're actually working it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, we will generally pull those lists and put them up, about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. Anything before that, we can't get the list, or it's of no use anyway, because it's not accurate. But yeah, I think that the list service that we have, I think, is more comprehensive than anything else out there that we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so first off here, why choose tax liens and deeds? I think there are a lot of simple answers to this, and I think that if you're here, you probably believe this to some degree already, or maybe you already completely believe it. But one of the reasons why is because if you're into acquiring property, it's the cheapest way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about tax lien certificates, it's an opportunity to earn a high interest rate return. It's a secure investment that is backed by real estate. And so for those investors that are, that may want to diversify funds from something like the stock market or mutual funds to earn a higher guaranteed return, tax liens are an avenue you can use that and do that.
Yeah, they are really one of very few investments out there that combine a high degree of profitability with also a high level of security. That's generally not how things work in the investment world. As profitability goes up, your security generally goes down, and so they are amazing in that way. Their tax liens are always secured by real estate. So when you have investments that are secured by real property, they don't get more secure than that.
Yeah, and also one thing about tax liens and tax deeds is all of these auctions are essentially enforced by state law. So, each state is going to have the laws that they create. And the tax sales essentially are not only protected by the property, but they're also protected by the law.
Yeah, it is how the county continues to operate. If this aspect of the county didn't function properly, and the county wasn't able to enforce, the collection of property taxes in one way or another, the whole system would shortly fall apart if there wasn't some kind of an enforcement method in place. And that's really what this is about. Counties need investors and the role that they play in here in order for them to keep, to continue to stay in business, I guess you could say, to keep paying the bills. And so, they need investors to come in because they need access to that capital.
Yeah. And, one other advantage is that there's always going to be new inventory coming in. So, every single month there's new auctions taking place, and every time there's new auctions, there's new over-the-counter opportunities, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. But there's always this opportunity, and there's also the ability to not only invest in person there at the county courthouse, but you can also invest online. A majority of our members invest outside their own state using online resources to do much of their research.
Yeah, and that's what has changed so dramatically, is our ability to do research from remote locations. It wasn't that long ago, even still in many counties now, if you want to, well, I guess not maybe, some counties now still, if you want to do research on a property, you have to be there on site in order to access their records. Fortunately, not too many of those anymore.
Yeah, in the past, that's the way you always had to do it, and that's what's nice about all of the online features and what we teach our members to do is to be able to essentially do all of this research using county records, online records, court records to determine if it's going to be a good investment.
Yeah, so I can go back here on the other one. We've got it switched up here a little bit. So let's talk about property taxes for a second, because they're an important part of how every county operates, but they're central to tax liens and deeds. It's important to understand how the property tax systems work in some of these different states, because you have to understand it in order to make good investment decisions. But really, property taxes are the original tax. They're the tax that makes the most sense. It was the first tax to come about in America, really.
Yeah, they're often referred to as ad valorem taxes, and really the tax sale process is the process that the counties use, that the governments use to enforce the collection of the taxes.
Yeah. In fact, it came about, I think, naturally as the need for local communities and governments arose. So did the need for funding, and so in that way, property taxes were kind of the first tax that came out of necessity, but they also make the most sense. And one of the reasons why they make the most sense is because the property tax itself and how much you pay is based on the two different things, actually. It's going to be based on the value of your property, the assessed value, but then it's also going to be based on the property tax rate for that year. And the reason why both of those are important is because the county's trying to meet a specific budget when they are collecting property taxes. It's not just a random number they're coming up with. They're trying to reach a specific number.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that tax bill is going to essentially dependent on two factors.
Yeah, it's going to be dependent on
the assessed value of property and also the property tax rate.
Yeah, exactly. Now, for the county, their primary concern is keeping the bills paid and being able to also enforce the property taxes. And so for them, they need property taxes are their primary source of revenue. And so if they're going to collect any money, they have to do it through property taxes. Therefore, the way they determine exactly what you pay in taxes every year, or how a tax bill is set up, is the county determines their budget first and foremost, so they know how much money they need. After that, they do something interesting. The assessor will add up the value of all of the real estate within the county. Once he has that value for all of the real estate, he can determine what the rate needs to be in order to reach that budget amount. So he'll know whether it needs to be 1% or 1.3% or whatever that number needs to be in order for them to be able to bring in their budget.
Yeah, and it's important they do, because if they don't have those funds, then that goes to pay for most of the services that we actually use. When it comes to, fire and police and school and roads and all of that stuff that we see in our daily lives, those are all going to be paid for through property taxes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also the enforcement system for property taxes. So there aren't too many people that lose their property because they won't pay their property taxes, but ultimately you've got to have some kind of a consequence if it doesn't get paid eventually. And so there's stuff like out there that exists. But if you're looking at a property tax bill, though, you should be able to see exactly what that tax rate amount is and what the assessed value of the property is, and it should help you understand the exact amount that you're paying. The property taxes themselves are, how the county collects that money, but there are different systems used out there for enforcing the system and making it work, and it's usually based on state law.
Yeah, exactly. There's 3 tax sale types. There's tax lien certificates, there's tax deeds, and then there's what we classify as redemption deeds.
Yeah. So what this means is that in most states here in the country, the state laws will outline one of these 3 systems, and that is what they use to enforce property taxes. There are a couple of states that use more than one system, but it's fairly straightforward for most of the states that are out there, and about a little bit more than a third of them use what are called tax lien certificates. So tax lien certificates, that's a term that everybody's heard.
Yeah, exactly. What tax liens are is they're a lien that's placed against the property because the property owner didn't pay those property taxes. Now, one thing that's great about tax liens and the reason people invest into them is because by paying off that debt, you're automatically earning an interest rate return for the debt that you pay.
Yeah. For the county, their primary concern is collecting the money that's owed to them. And at this point, it's fairly delinquent. And so they're concerned about how long it's going to take in order to collect that. This works out pretty well for tax lien states or counties within tax lien states, because this is a fairly quick solution for collecting the delinquent taxes. The way that it works is the county places a tax lien, which is a government lien against the property. It's also what we would call a first position lien, because it is issued by the government. This lien, though, what it does is it utilizes that property as collateral for the debt that's owed, and it prevents certain things from happening, like a transfer of ownership. You can't sell it while that lien exists.
Yeah, exactly. So every state is going to have a redemption period. That's essentially a time frame that the property owner has before you can start the foreclosure process. And that's another thing that makes tax liens unique, is that if the property owner doesn't pay you back within that redemption period, then you can actually take that tax lien certificate and foreclose on it and become the new property's owner. So in enforcing that foreclosure, the property owner either is going to pay you back, you make your interest in return, or you're going to end up owning the property, and in that case, you bought the property for usually under 5 cents of the property's value.
Yeah, it's usually just a fraction, because generally speaking, property taxes are not more than 0.5% to maybe 2% of the property's estimated value annually. So when you're talking about the cost to foreclose on properties, we're usually talking about a couple of years worth of delinquent taxes.
Yeah, and it could be closer to 5 to 10%, but literally you're getting the property for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, that is true. And it's also important to note here that the vast majority of tax liens, over 95%, redeem. And literally what that means is simply that the delinquent property owner ended up paying off their debt to the county in terms of how much they owed in taxes and fees. This is what happens the majority of the time because most people do pay their property taxes and don't want to lose a valuable property because of a comparatively small tax bill amount.
Yeah, and one thing that I think some people don't understand about tax liens is it's really a win-win-win situation. The property owner has extra time to pay their property taxes. Yes, now there's a fee, but there's a fee anytime we're late anything in life, so that's pretty standard. The investor is able to capitalize and make an interest rate off of that return, and usually able to make a double-digit return, which makes it worth it to the investor. And the county, which needs that money desperately, is able to get that money in so that they can pay for all of their services in their budget. And so for tax lien states, they don't want to wait for the redemption period because the redemption period could take 3 to 5 years, and they need that money now. And so this is a great way to give property owners a break or a time frame so they don't lose their property, give the investors a return, and then give the county the money they need.
Yeah, really what it does is, it gives the county the power to determine when they can collect the delinquent taxes that they haven't been able to collect so far. And so for the county, this works great because that's their main concern. And so by holding a tax sale, they can have investors come and be able to essentially provide that money, and investors make good returns to compensate them when that happens. These are a couple of examples here.
Yeah, exactly. Here's 4 examples that were purchased by either coaching members or members that attended the 3-day on over-the-counter tax liens. So we're going to be talking about over-the-counter tax liens and deeds tonight, and these are actually examples of them. And you can see that these properties aren't necessarily what we would consider the most sexy properties in the world. But looking at the amount paid for the lien, the interest that they're making, and the value of the property, these are all incredible investments. Looking at the top one is a $620 lien valued on a $44,000 property, or a $12,000 lien valued on a $65,000 property. But each one of these properties, will go ahead and either earn that 14% return, but if the owner doesn't pay back, then they can go ahead and start the foreclosure process.
Yeah, in fact, I think that, the way that you look at tax liens, I think it can have an impact, I think, on your ability to invest in them. These liens here are all liens that are almost guaranteed to redeem. The reason we say that is because the tax bill amount, or what's owed in taxes is very small amounts. I mean, $1,200, $500, $800. These are all liens that are highly likely to redeem, and most tax liens are long-term investments for high interest rate returns. They are incredibly safe in that way, and they're also very simple investments in that the investor usually doesn't have to do anything except for sit back and wait to collect a check in the mail.
Yeah, exactly. Most of the time you are just going to be getting an interest rate return, and usually if people are after property, we recommend them getting started with tax deeds, but there is things you can do with tax liens, for example, like buying over the counter, that at least increases your chances. For example, these liens here are on property that have been on the books for a couple of years. So you could start the foreclosure process in a quicker period of time. So maybe instead of having only 5% of liens that end up getting the property, on these type of properties, maybe you bump that up to 10%.
Yeah.
Or 15%, where you buy 10 tax liens, you may get one of these homes, and at that point, not making 14%, you're making
way higher,
5,000% or whatever.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point to bring up here, is that when it comes to tax lien investing, that it is a strategy that can be utilized to acquire property. In fact, if you buy enough tax liens, you will acquire property. It's just a matter of how the numbers work out.
Well, and that's what's so sweet about tax lien investing is you can kind of at least increase your chances depending on how you invest and where you invest. For example, in Florida, you're very rarely ever going to get the property because the way the Florida works with their deed auctions. So if you're looking primarily for interest rate and not acquiring property, then you could look at those, or buying tax liens, at the very first of the year where they have a higher chance of redeeming because they're brand new tax liens.
Yeah. What Steve brings up in regards to Florida is a really good point, because it's a fairly confusing place when it comes to tax liens. In most tax lien states, the tax liens are sold with a redemption period, and at the end of that redemption period, the lien holder has the right to pursue foreclosure. And so at that point, it's just a matter of whether or not the person pays. If they don't pay, the lien holder forecloses on the property and takes ownership of it. What Florida does that's unique and different is they sell liens, of course, every year, and those liens are sold with a 2-year redemption period. However, when that redemption period comes to an end, the lien holder will generally fill out a form or basically submit a simple form with the county to initiate that process. And for the county, that starts the process for them for preparing it for auction.
Yeah, exactly. And so when it goes up to the deed sale, whoever ends up buying that property, and it will end up essentially paying off those tax lien certificates to the lien holder, and the lien holder is going to get their money. So if the only way you would acquire a property in Florida through a tax lien would be if nobody bid it at the auction, and if you're buying the right tax liens, it should be selling at the auction.
Yeah, in other words, the only way that the lien holder ends up with the property in Florida is if the property is offered up at the tax sale and it doesn't get a bid.
Yeah, nobody wanted it.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes you'll see tax liens. I mean, you'll see property in Florida at auctions. If it doesn't get a bid, it will say awarded to certificate holder.
Yeah, and most of Florida is a competitive enough state where if a property is a good property and going to be offered for a minimum bid, and the minimum bid is a fraction of the property's value, it's going to sell.
Yeah, and
so
if it doesn't, it's usually because it's junk.
Yeah, or there was 7 years worth of back taxes on the property, and for whatever reason, those back taxes end up being almost as much for whatever reason as the property.
Yeah, which that's something that we look at too when we go to buy tax liens. They're very safe investments. In fact, one of the reasons why tax liens are great to buy is because you can oftentimes purchase them without needing the same kind of due diligence that you would if you were acquiring property.
Yeah.
You can make the decision relatively quickly. But at the same time, though, these still provide an excellent rate of return. And still that chance or that opportunity to acquire property. Most of the time, it's going to result in you earning just a high rate of return. But yeah, you buy enough of these liens, and you're going to end up foreclosing on some properties, and that's where your rate of return goes up dramatically.
Yeah, but if you want to get started with property to begin with, usually we're going to recommend you start looking at tax deeds. And because what tax deeds are is essentially tax deed states wait until the redemption period is passed, and then they actually just foreclose on the property. So they don't sell tax lien certificates or anything like that. They just hold the debt. The county holds the debt, and the county earns the interest, and then or any type of penalties for the late payments. And then once it's gotten 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the county will actually foreclose on the property.
Yeah. So. With tax deeds, which represent about half the states out there have tax deeds in some form. Really, the county has that power to foreclose on the property, and they will sell the property to recover what's owed in taxes. So bidding is going to start at how much is owed in penalties and fees, but will usually be sold to the highest bidder.
Yeah, absolutely. What's important about tax deeds is this isn't a lien, this isn't anything like that. When you're buying a tax deed, you are buying the property. You are the owner of the property. So, it's just in a lot of ways, like buying any type of other real estate, you are now the owner. We need to figure out a sell strategy and an exit strategy. The exit strategy with tax liens, most of the time, there's really no exit strategy other than you'll wait till get your check back.
Yeah, just cashing that check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with tax deeds, we need to have a strategy in hand, whether that be to rent the property out, to rehab it, to flip it, whatever. That's what makes tax deeds different.
Yeah, yeah, and also with tax deeds, we have a tremendous opportunity to acquire property for lower prices than you can find anywhere else in the country, or using any other kind of strategy. And the reason for that is because when it comes to these tax deeds, the county has no personal interest in how much the property sells for. In fact, outside of that opening bid amount, they're not even going to do anything with the extra money if they collect it. It'll end up going into an account to go to the previous owner. So they're not interested in the selling price of the property. It makes no difference to them. But for us as investors, it creates an amazing opportunity because it's the only buying method where the owner doesn't have a personal interest in what it sells for.
Yeah, absolutely. And here are 4 different examples of student deals that we're working with some of our students that have done recently. And really, these are in several different states, 3 or 4 different states. And we can see that some of these deals start as little as $100 up to around $30,000.
Yeah.
But each one of these has the potential to make profit or has already made huge profit. So the first one in the top left-hand corner, that was a property that was purchased by one of our coaching students, and it was actually in one of these areas that we teach them about areas where you can buy property for even less than the back taxes. So usually, like we talked about, the back taxes is going to be the lowest amount you can buy the property. Well, there's certain areas where if they didn't get sold in the over-the-counter, you can buy them for less. And so they bought this property for $100, ended up selling it to the neighbor right there pretty quickly. It was worth about $7,000, so they sold it to them for $2,900. So they still gave it to them for over 50% off.
Yeah, and it was a wholesale transaction. They did, so the buyer is still going to be able to make money on the property too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now these buyers bought it for their own use, but just by doing it, they bought it for about 40% of the value. But she was still able to make a $2,800 profit, which is essentially a 2,800% return.
Yeah, which is amazing. Property that we can acquire for less than taxes owed is pretty much a land giveaway. Counties all across the country, have different properties they're trying to collect property taxes on, and they have some that they never collect those taxes on. And the problem that the counties run into, especially in the past when they were reliant on people coming to their tax sale in order to get stuff sold, it's a major problem for the county because they're relying on being able to sell these properties in order to recover or in order to collect that money that is owed. And if they don't sell it, the only real option, the county's going to put it back on the books and wait, but that opening bid amount keeps going up and the property begins to look less and less attractive.
Yeah, well, and one thing that's nice about tax sale investing and really probably has changed a little bit over the last 5 years. It wasn't quite as good as it is today, is you can get started at any dollar level. I mean, we have property here starting at $100 and up to $30,000.
Yeah.
And you can go, there's tax sale properties that'll sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but there's an opportunity, even if you are just getting started. Some of our first coaching students only had a couple of $1,000s to get started with. And that was part of the reason why we created some of these strategies and started looking at some of these properties where you can pick them up for cheap, turn around and sell and make a good profit.
Yeah, see, for counties, they have an opportunity right now. They realize, I think, that the internet dramatically simplifies the process for them of selling property. They can reach way more people. And many counties seem to be recognizing this because what we see happening is many of them are unloading inventory that they've been sitting on for 20 years, 30 years in some cases, or even longer. We're seeing them clean house, and try to unload some of these properties that have been sitting on their books. And these properties may not have anything wrong with them, aside from the fact that maybe there was just too much owed on them, or whatever it is, at a low enough dollar amount. It's a wonderful investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and not only that, but there's 500. We have usually over 500 different auctions on our auction calendar each month. So there's always new opportunity, whether it be through live auctions, through online auctions, or property that don't sell with new over the counters. So there's always this fresh inventory that's coming in. So, we never get too hung up on a particular property. We always walk away rather than overpaying, because we always know there's going to be another auction, another sale.
Yeah, really being able to buy it at these low prices is the biggest advantage we have with tax sales. So we don't want to give that away.
Yeah.
Redemption deeds are the third system here out of the three systems that we've talked about. And they are kind of a unique hybrid system between the others. There are really only a handful of states that utilize what we would call a redemption deed system.
Yeah, and the term redemption deed isn't necessarily a system or a name that the county may call these type of properties. Really, this was a categorization or a term that we came up with about 15, 16 years ago to kind of categorize properties or areas like Texas and Georgia and Tennessee that were not really tax lien states, but were tax deed states. And really what they are is they're kind of a combination of both. Redemption deeds are like a tax deed, where most of the time you're actually getting a deed to the property, but they're not going to record the deed, and they have a redemption period, kind of like a tax lien certificate.
Yeah, so you can purchase, the property, but you may not have the power to sell the property for a set time following, the purchase. And that in some cases that's 6 months. So for instance, like in Texas, for most land there in Texas, the redemption period is 6 months. And so if you buy that, you're not going to be able to sell it, before 6 months roll along.
Yeah. Also redemption periods, kind of like Shade mentioned, they're going to be shorter. Only farmland and some type of property, single family homes called homestead properties, have a 2-year redemption period. All other redemption deeds are a year or less. So there's 3 months, 6 months, a year, but really there's, most of them you're going to acquire the property within 6 months to a year. So it is a shorter period. Also, it's not the interest, the return, if the property is redeemed, isn't like a tax lien certificate where it's, you're making 1.5% per month. You're going to make the full penalty. So in Texas, let's say that you bought a property this year at the auction that happened on Tuesday. Well, in that case, and then you purchase the property, the very next day, some owner comes in and pays off that back taxes. You're going to make a full 25% off of your return, regardless if it redeemed then or a year from now or 6 months from now.
Yeah, in Texas, the annual penalty rate is 25%. And the difference between a penalty rate and interest rate returns is that one accrues and one is a flat percentage that's paid out regardless of when in that time period it happens. And so this is a good thing in terms of what it generally does to the investment, but redemption deeds in general are a little bit challenging because they kind of have the you could say the best and worst of both worlds. They're in the you can buy the property and there's that chance that you may just have it redeemed and you're going to earn a high rate of return. But you also may end up with a property, of course.
Yeah, with redemption deeds, we're really looking at it more like we would with a tax deed. In fact, you bid them up like you would a tax deed. You bid up the price. And so, like a tax deed certificate, most of the time you're going to be bidding down the interest rate. But with a redemption deed, let's say a property starts at 10 grand fact, we could even flip over and show some of the examples to kind of show you what I'm talking about. Let's say this first property starts at 4,900 on the top left hand. Starts at 4,900, and let's say it ends up bidding to 10,000. At that point it bids up to 10,000, and the property owner, if they do try to redeem, is going to have to pay not that $4,000 or 25% of the $5,000. They're going to have to pay 25% of the $10,000. So to redeem the property, they're going to pay $10,000 plus an additional, in this case, $2,500 on top of it. So they'd have to pay $12,500 to get their property back versus the $5,000. And so with redemption deeds, you're going to have a lot higher likelihood. I wouldn't quite say we flip it where 95% of the time you're going to get the property, but it's definitely, closer to 50 to 75%.
Yeah. And that's, part of the reason why they're still good investments here. It's because either outcome is still a pretty good outcome, and the time frame isn't too terribly long. Now, Texas does have certain properties that have a 2-year redemption period attached to them, and those are homestead properties and farmland.
Yeah, and both of those properties are pretty rare on the list. With homestead properties, usually a homestead property is somebody's home, their single only home. And so with those type of properties, the counties are going to be more willing to work, put them on payment programs, do whatever they can. So it's really more of the rental properties or somebody's second property or land or commercials or things like that that are usually going to come up to the sale in Texas more often than a homestead.
Yeah, but yeah, you can kind of see how if you were to buy a property for 10,000.
And one thing to quickly mention is that in Texas you do have ownership rights during that period.
Oh yeah, that is a good point.
So if it is, let's say we did purchase one of these homes, we could go ahead and rent it out during that time frame. Or let's say that the property is currently being rented. It was a rental that was owned by somebody who just didn't pay their property taxes. You could go ahead and start collecting rent on that property. You're just not going to want to do any type of major rehab or anything like that, other than just
put money into it,
basic maintenance up until that foreclosure period is over.
Yeah, because it has that chance to redeem. But you're going to have a high chance of acquiring the property though in a sale like that. So with those buying methods, with those the 3 enforcement methods there out of the way. When it comes to buying tax liens and tax deeds, it's pretty straightforward. In reality, there are really just 2 ways you can buy, either from an auction or after the auction, which in this case, we've also got a split between live auctions and now online auctions that also exist. But it's still pretty much between one of those auctions or buying it over the counter after the auction.
Yeah, exactly. And so for tonight, what we actually wanted to do is we wanted to break down and talk about over-the-counter investing a little bit. Now that you've kind of got an idea of the 3 different tax sale systems and kind of how it works. So, what is over-the-counter investing?
Yeah, over-the-counter is a term that we use a lot, probably more than counties actually do. But that's partly because the counties don't have a terminology that everybody is used to using. Counties kind of do their own thing. And so over-the-counter is what some counties may call it, but other counties may call it something different. What it is, though, is pretty much the same everywhere, and that is when a tax sale property is offered up at a tax sale, if it doesn't sell, then it goes back on the books. And you can oftentimes purchase that still directly from the county, and if you do so after the auction, it's called over-the-counter investing.
Yeah, exactly. So over-the-counter investing can be purchased with tax liens, tax deeds, and even redemption deeds in Texas. And there's literally hundreds of thousands of tax liens and deeds that are available over the counter throughout the different states.
Yeah. For most of these counties, the decision to offer over-the-counter properties, it makes sense because there are so many different reasons why they may not be able to sell something at the auction. It makes sense to be able to purchase it afterwards. But for investors, it gives us some major benefits, that are associated with buying, using this method here. But after the tax sale, though, if counties don't sell a property, they've only got a couple of options.
Yeah. First thing is they could go ahead and place the liens or deeds back on the books and schedule another tax sale. So a lot of times we'll see this in what's called resales, where a county, happens in California because California doesn't offer over the counters, where they'll go ahead and have an auction. Everything that didn't sell, they'll go ahead and have a resale. A lot of times they'll go ahead and discount the opening bid amount.
Yeah.
So this is one of those options that we teach our coaching students in buying property for less than taxes.
Yeah, because if you are paying attention at some of these subsequent sales, resales, then you're dealing with situations where the county says, okay, let's forget about how much is owed, and let's just get a new owner into the property.
Yeah, there's other ones that just go ahead and put them on the books until the next year's sale. And then, of course, there's counties that just go ahead and create a list of over-the-counter tax liens and deeds and make them available for purchase.
Yeah. So when you can purchase them, directly from the county after the sale, you're obviously able to kind of bypass the competition because you're not competing directly with anybody. So there are some advantages that way. Things like earning the maximum interest rate return.
Yeah, exactly. And one question we get a ton is, especially from new investors that haven't done it, is, well, if these over the counters, if nobody bought them, they're all junk, right? Why didn't these things sell at the property, sell at the auction? And really the number one reason is because there's more property than there is investors and money at the sale. You may have a $500,000 worth of delinquent property available at the sale, and if there's only $200,000 worth of money among the 10 investors that are there, there's going to automatically be leftover tax liens and deeds.
Yeah, there can be other reasons why a property could end up available over the counter. It can be something as simple as the winning bidder defaults or doesn't pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we probably could add one other in here as well, and that's going to be that it's junk. And there is going to be a ton of those junk type of properties within the tax sale list, but that doesn't mean that all the properties are junk. And that doesn't mean that, that it was neglected because it wasn't a good investment.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, one of the challenges that we have is distinguishing between properties that do have value and the stuff that we do believe is junk or useless.
Yeah. So, she started to kind of talk a little bit about some of those advantages. The first one being no travel. You don't need to go out and view these properties in a lot of cases. In fact, most cases, you're able to do all of the research, especially if you're tax liens and if you're even buying tax deed land, without even sending somebody out to view the property.
Yeah, we can do all of that research online now, and it also takes a fraction of the time frame that it used to. And oh, by the way, let me just answer a couple questions here. Are there any auctions during January or February? Yeah, there are
400 to 500 every month.
Yeah, there are auctions every single month. And let's see here on tax deed redemption, as in Texas, is the 25% based on the price paid? Yes, it is. It's based on the price paid for the property. So it's going to be a flat 25% of that purchase price. And so that it's pretty good. It's a pretty good rate of return if it does redeem. The only downside there is that you are going to have to sit on it and wait during that time in case it does.
Yeah.
But yeah, other advantages exist though. We mentioned the lack of competition. That's how you earn what we call the maximum rate of return in the state. So every state will have a maximum that they'll set. For instance, 18 might be the maximum, so they'll use that as a starting point, and then competitive bidding brings that down until you have the bidder that's willing to accept the lowest rate of return.
Yeah, that's what's so awesome about over-the-counter tax liens and deeds is the over-the-counter tax liens, you're getting at the highest interest rate, or you're not bidding up the premium like you may in other areas or in other states. And so, You know, in those examples that we showed earlier, our students were earning the maximum 14% return in that state because they were purchasing these tax liens over the counter. They weren't bidding down that interest rate. Or in the case of tax deeds, they're getting it for just the back taxes. And usually the back taxes, unless there's additional issues with the property, usually is going to be under 10% of what the property's value is. So that gives us a good opportunity to go out there and actually buy properties for 10 cents or less on the dollar.
Yeah. Now, one of the tricks to being able to find the information that you are looking for when it comes to tax sales and county research is by knowing the proper terminology that's used, by knowing how the county operates in terms of who is responsible for which, for which aspects of the county. And the list you see here are just some of the different names that over-the-counter, over-the-counter liens and deeds are given. And there's a lot of them. Over-the-counter assignment purchasing, county owned or county held, tax forfeited land is one we hear sometimes.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different names, and there's some states will have different terminology. Like Texas, they consider the over-the-counter struck off. So if you're talking about over-the-counter, the official may not know what you're talking about. It's the terminology is going to be struck off. In fact, that's something that we break down in all of our state guides in our program, is what is the terminology that's going to be used within that area when you are looking or asking or contacting somebody about these over-the-counter properties.
Yeah, to make it way easier, so that you're talking, so that everybody understands the language there of each other. So tax liens are interesting when it comes to over-the-counter opportunities because they've got several benefits that they provide to the investor. In addition to earning that maximum interest rate return that you earn when you buy it over the counter, the redemption period also begins on the original date of the sale, even if the tax lien doesn't sell. So basically, while the property is sitting there on the books, the redemption period can be winding down. So you can purchase, liens that have varying amounts of redemption period left.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one thing about tax liens that we do need to consider when we are buying over-the-counter tax liens is that we are earning interest off what we call the face amount. And we break this down in more of our trainings, but when you buy a tax lien, let's say you buy a $100 tax lien, each month that tax lien is going up because it's earning interest each month. The county's earning interest. So when we buy the tax lien, we're not going to be buying it for the face amount. We're going to be buying it for that interest that's accrued on top of it.
The redemptive value is what they call that.
Yeah, so if we were looking at a $1,000 tax lien and it had been, on the books for, let's say, a year, and there was a year's worth of interest, then we would actually pay to buy the tax lien $1,180 because it's earning 18%, but we're going to earn the 18% off the $1,000. So it's going to make that 18% down to, a 17 or 16.5 or 17% or something like that. So it will affect it a little bit, but that's something you're going to want to look into.
Yeah. Now, with over the, actually, hold on, there was one more thing I think I was going to bring up there on those. Oh yeah, that's right. With tax liens, they all have the redemption period. In fact, all tax liens have the same redemption period in terms of the duration in the state. So every tax lien that is sold in Florida has a 2-year redemption period. And that's important because the liens are offered generally once a year. Tax liens are usually something that are sold at one sale during the year because they represent a single year's worth of delinquent taxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why this is important is because you can have multiple liens against a property in some cases, and if there's multiple liens against a property, sometimes investors get confused about who has foreclosure rights and how all of that works. But it's really pretty simple. Especially if you foreclose on properties after the redemption period expires. If you do that, you'll never really run into problems. But if there are multiple properties that have, I mean, if there are multiple liens against the property that are eligible to foreclose, then it's just a matter of who files it first.
Yeah, it really comes down to, first come, first serve.
Yeah.
Now, in our over-the-counter database, here are some of the different states that offer over-the-counter tax liens. It just says South on the bottom. It's supposed to be South Carolina. But you can see that there's a lot of different states that it will offer over-the-counter tax liens. The best time every year to buy over-the-counter tax liens is right after the auction has taken place. Right when those fresh liens come out, because investors know that there's going to be good tax liens on some of those over-the-counter lists, so they'll start going through them. So, if you look at an over-the-counter list 6 months after the Florida sale, they're going to weed out all of the best over-the-counters.
Yeah. In fact, the best time to get that is right after when it comes out, because all of those properties, are basically you can make the maximum interest rate return on, and so. That inventory goes away quickly. Over-the-counter liens are not something that they don't store well, in that way. So with each of these counties, though, with each of these states, there are over-the-counter investment opportunities, and some of them have thousands and thousands of them.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, all of the properties that we showed through the examples are properties that were purchased off of our lists, or lists that we got over-the-counter lists, from different counties. Now, over-the-counter tax deeds and tax deeds in general is really working on the concept of buying property for a low price and turning around and selling it for a higher price.
Yeah, these are properties that are being foreclosed on because of delinquent taxes. And so these properties were then offered up at the auction, starting out at what's owed in taxes, penalties, and fees. If it doesn't get a bidder, if nobody buys it, though, it still sits on the books, and it can be purchased for just that minimum amount. That's always been one of the really attractive things about over-the-counter tax deeds, is the fact that you can purchase that property for the opening bid amount, which is almost always, a fraction of value.
Yeah, and when we buy these properties, we have 100% ownership rights. So we're going to be getting a deed to the property, and at that point, we can either choose to wholesale the property, where we're selling it for a discount and selling it essentially as is the way we bought it, or we can go through a process known as quiet title, where we go ahead and get a warranty deed on the property so we can get traditional financing, and it's like any other type of property. It's undistinguishable between any other type of property. It's no longer necessarily a tax sale property.
Yeah, these are some of the tax deed states that are out there, and there are actually even some states that are officially lien states, but still have some deeds too.
Yeah, in fact, the ones that are underlined are states that offer both tax liens and tax deeds. In fact, we should have Florida on there too, or offer a combination. And we've seen this happening more and more, where counties are getting smart, and instead of just sitting on old inventory that doesn't get purchased year after year after year, they're starting to foreclose on these properties and offering them up at the tax sale. We've seen this in areas like Arizona or even Colorado, where they have these over-the-counter tax liens, and maybe it's had 10 or 20 years worth of back tax liens, so nobody's ever going to buy the property, even though it's a nice, decent lot. It's maybe it's worth 15 or 20 grand, but it's got 15 or 20 grand's worth of back taxes. And so they're just foreclosing off these properties and offering them up through deed sales or through over-the-counters.
Yeah, really, their whole goal here is just simply to get a new property owner, in possession of the property, so that they can begin collecting property taxes on it again.
Yeah. Now, as far as over-the-counter redemption deeds, there's really only the state of Texas that really offers them. Georgia does have some, but they really end up turning into deeds by the time that they offer them those over-the-counters. So Texas is really kind of the redemption deed over-the-counter state. And like we mentioned, they're referred to them as struck-off deeds.
Yeah. Georgia is kind of a weird state in how it works. Kind of a redemption deed state. but kind of a tax deed state now too.
Yeah, but there is opportunity in Texas, and one thing that is nice about Texas is that they do have auctions every single month.
Yeah.
So there is going to be new opportunity. Now, one thing about Texas struck off as well is we have talked to some counties in the past where if it was on the struck off list, they'll at least consider offers for less than the back taxes. Now, not every county will do that, but we have had counties that say, sure, send in an offer, we'll look it over, and and we'll make a decision.
Yeah. Now, something else to note about the auctions there in Texas is that nearly all of these are conducted as live on-site auctions. There haven't been online auction opportunities in Texas until just recently. In the last 6 to 12 months, we've had a couple of counties that are moving to online, but the vast majority of Texas still operates as live sales.
Yeah. In fact, that was probably even a little bit more recent than that, 3 or 4 months ago. And they have 2 other counties that are in the process. They just haven't completed building their sites and stuff. So there should be 4 counties that offer over the counters, which is good. Just keep adding them, gives us opportunity. But there should be 4 counties by next year.
Yeah, which is great. The online opportunities are wonderful because they simplify the process so much.
Yeah.
So when it comes to over-the-counter investing here, there's 6 steps that we're going to go through here, or I guess essentially that will happen. The county will put the available liens or deeds together into the over-the-counter list after the sale.
Yeah, exactly. So once the county has went ahead and put together that list, then you can obtain the list by contacting the county, or if you're a member of Tax Sale Support, you'll automatically have access to it. So once we've got that list, then we're going to be using, we're going to research that list, go through the list, and research for possible investment opportunities.
Yeah, one of the questions here is good. Which Texas counties have over the counter, and how can I locate them? So yeah, they're called struck off there in Texas, and I don't know how many of them. Most of them have.
Yeah, at some time or another.
So yeah.
Depending on what they have and how many they have, but.
In other words, at some point they have properties that don't sell, and so a lot of them though are sitting on a whole bunch of inventory. And what you need to do in those cases is to locate the inventory of that property is not always completely straightforward, because it's not always just sitting there on the treasurer's website or something.
No, most of them are actually done through law firms. So there's 3 or 4 major law firms that it will handle a lot of the tax sales, and also will handle some of the struck off stuff as well, and the resale stuff. So we actually have a video on our YouTube that you can go back and review that goes over Texas and has those 3 different, some of the different law firms and things that break down.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the kinds of properties that we target, and this is true of liens or deeds, we want to target property that has use and value, and that can either be vacant land, or it can be property with structure, or improved property. It can be both of those, as long as it has use and value and the price is right.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't get hung up on what type of property it is, as long as it has use and value. For example, if we were to participate in a tax lien auction, and there was a $100,000 single family home and a $100,000 commercial lot, and the single family home got bid down to, let's say, 7 or 8%, and the $100,000 building lot, same value, got bid, went to 17.5 or 16% or 17%. We're going to go for the higher interest rate return, even though it's on land and not on a single family home, which may not look, as fancy.
Yeah.
Or sexy, but yeah. We're only looking at the numbers.
Yeah, when in reality, to us, the vacant land is actually easier, just because it's easier to assess the value of. There's less to need to take into account.
Well, and we're not going to have to worry about things like, well, what happens if it burns down?
Yeah.
Luckily, if you're buying a tax lien, it should only be a couple of % of the property's value. So if it does burn down, there's still value in the land. But, those are one of the advantages of looking at land and not shying away from it. So many investors are all looking for that perfect, white picket fence house, that they can buy, and they many times neglect the property that have just as much, if not even more, profitability.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about some of the opportunities that are out there, but there is still a fair amount of junk that counties have. I mean, there's always leftover land in every community, and certain land that just can't really be used for anything or doesn't have a real purpose. And this is true of both liens and deeds. As deeds, we don't want to buy the properties that don't have any real value, and as liens, we don't want to buy liens against properties that don't have any value, because there's no point in foreclosing on one if we could. So there are certain kinds of properties that we want to avoid, and this is a list of some of the properties or property characteristics we want to look out for. So land that has no use or useless land. You can also say land that has no real world value.
Yeah. Also, one thing about over-the-counter properties, are we're going to be very cautious when it comes to over-the-counter structured properties, whether that be homes or commercial properties. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not good over-the-counter properties, over-the-counter homes and structured properties that are available. But if it didn't get sold at the auction and it's been sitting as well, not only there, let's say that the home's been sitting on the books for 6 months or a year, it's gone empty that entire time. So one thing we do when it comes to at least tax deeds, we won't do the same thing with tax liens because we don't have a chance, but with tax deeds, we're always going to send out either ourselves or someone else, whether that be a handyman, to take current photos of the property so we can really judge that condition. Because you could easily, see a tax deed and you go on Google Street View and it looks good and you feel great about it, and you buy this tax deed home just to find out that it's condemned or is going to cost more money to fix it than it's worth.
Yeah. Great comment here from Mary. Mary says, went to the Texas auction on Tuesday. Buyer paid $47,000 on a $40,000 value home. So the purchaser will probably end up owning it and therefore have property priced above the market. So first off, on a couple of things here. So in terms of why investors always do this, it is kind of hard to say. So if the county's assessed value on the property was $40,000, then maybe sometimes people, all it takes is two big crazy bidders to bid properties up way too high, and in this case, paying $47,000 on the property, if it's valued at $40,000, might not make sense, but it actually still could be something, or at least they didn't lose money.
Well, and also you're looking there at the assessed value and not necessarily the market value. So we've purchased properties that had an assessed value that's half of what the market value could be. Now it could just be like Shade said, two unwise investors bidding against a property and getting emotionally involved and paying more than they should. And that's one of the things that we teach our coaching students to, and all of our members to do, is to really set their bidding limits and go in there with limits. Because the one thing about Texas is there's always going to be another auction. Many of the counties have multiple auctions, throughout the year, some as much as every single month. And so there's always going to be a new fresh inventory. So we'd rather walk away from a deal like that than overpaying.
But also, Mary, that deal also kind of shows, though, why there is a much higher chance of foreclosing on the property in Texas, and even in cases like this, it does increase the chances of foreclosing on the property as well, because the original opening bid amount, or what was owed in taxes, was probably, I don't know what it was, $10,000 or $15,000 maybe, and that was basically the amount that the delinquent owner owed, prior to that sale, which they obviously didn't have the money to come up, or they didn't have that at the time. And once it's gone through that now, because it sold for $47,000, in order to redeem it, in addition to what they owed before, they're going to have to pay 25% of that, which is another $10,000. I mean, they basically like doubled the amount owed, probably.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, and if it's a tear down, you know, yeah, hopefully the value isn't a lot. I don't know why people do that. Never ever buy structure or improved property without getting some kind of an on-site inspection performed, even if it's not you, even if you have to pay somebody to go out there and look. Don't ever buy one sight unseen, I mean, unless you're just buying it on the value of the land alone, because that's all you can really count on.
Yeah. Well, if there is some, I would rather not, unless the land is incredibly valuable, I would avoid the headache of having to worry about tear down and all of that.
Yeah, I totally agree here. So, getting started is also something that some people, can struggle with in the beginning because there's so many different places out there. But that's part of the reason why it's a good idea to do something like join our membership program. We can walk you through that process and, help streamline it for you.
Yeah. Regardless of what you do, it's important to get educated. And there's, a ton of information out there. In fact, that's really how me and Shade learned everything we've learned, is just by going to county websites, participating, kind of through real world experience. And so it's important that you understand how this works, because it is possible to make a mistake. And there is things like attending an auction, and something you may not even think about is like emotional bidding, where the auction gets competitive and you can feel emotion, and suddenly you end up overpaying. I mean, it can happen to professionals and people like us that have been doing it, for years. And so it's good to go in there with a plan and knowing exactly what you're bidding on.
Yeah. The auctions rely on that. They want people to be emotional about bidding, but we try to avoid that everywhere we can. And also, it affects the kinds of properties that we target sometimes and how we go about trying to bid on them. But that's something for another week here altogether. If you would like, let's see here. One of the questions we just had here: how can I find out about the mentoring? Who are the mentors, and what is the cost? These are great questions. So the program that we have is actually pretty small.
Yeah. In fact, we can send out a link if you're interested, or you can go ahead and go to our coaching page and fill out a form there, and we'll have somebody contact you and go over all the details.
Yeah, so on taxsalesupport.com, you can go under under coaching, under the services, and there's a place there where you can submit a request for information.
Yeah, and we'll have somebody contact you and answer all of your questions. As far as our membership, though, it really is, the best value in tax sale education.
Yeah. The combination of both, I think, lists and the training resources that make it very worth it. And just one last thing here, we still have a couple of tickets. It's almost sold out, but if you would like to attend, it should be a fantastic event. Even includes meals and stuff. So, it should be a pretty nice event and really a bargain there for everything you get.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a great event. In fact, here's a couple of examples of properties that were purchased by new students that had not really invested before after the 3-day event, during or after the 3-day event. There's an over-the-counter tax deed you can see purchased, and then an over-the-counter tax lien as well.
Yeah, which the success that we're having with the little group of coaching students that we work with is incredible. Yeah, it is absolutely incredible what many of the coaching members that we've been working with here for a little while are starting to do. Well, thank you guys for the compliment. We do love to hear from you guys, and and also we love to work with you. We're always trying to warn people and help them save their money, because I don't think anything bothers us more than seeing people spend a ton of money on trainings that don't work.
Yeah, well, and that's really the reason we put together our membership program. So you can get started for as little as $29 a month, $39 if you choose to do month to month. Offer a money back guarantee, because with we had worked with over 50,000 students, investors over that decade period. that spent $2,000 to $3,000 with our program, and we were able to help them have success and created an A+ rating with the BBB and didn't have any complaints because just that information was enough to help investors go out there and get started. And so for us taking that and making it available, we've tried to put as much tools. In fact, you could spend hundreds of hours researching training and still have hundreds of hours left.
Yeah, it's way more in depth than most people realize. But it's definitely the best time to be getting involved too. So yeah, if you would like more information, go to taxsalesupport.com and to the services page where you can click on coaching, and you can submit a request there for any information, or you can also do the same thing about the 3-day.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to go ahead and we'll put this up for replay as well. So if you'd like to catch the replay, it should be available here soon.
Yeah. So hey, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will hope to catch you the next time.
Yep. Thanks again.